He who is brave is free. Seneca. In our lives, we often find ourselves seeking validation, constantly measuring our worth based on the approval and judgment of others. We chase after their opinions, believing that happiness is tied to their recognition. Yet, in the quiet of our own thoughts, we may find an uncomfortable truth. We are living for others, not for ourselves. Stoicism teaches us that true happiness and freedom do not come from external approval, but from the understanding of who we are, from accepting what we cannot control, and from living in alignment with our internal values. In the face of life's storms, whether it's the weight of failure, the ache of loss, or the weariness that comes from constantly striving, we often forget that peace does not lie outside of us. It's not found in the praise of others or in the pursuit of perfection. It is found in the courage to let go of what we cannot change and to embrace what we can, our thoughts, our actions, and our ability to control how we respond. In this pursuit of self-mastery, we find not just freedom, but the kind of deep, enduring happiness that no one can take from us. Let us step back, look inward, and remember that the path to true peace lies not in others' eyes, but in our own. 1. Anxiety and judgment from others. There are moments in life when you find yourself standing in front of a mirror, questioning your worth. You might have just finished a presentation at work, and instead of feeling accomplished, all you can think about is how others are judging you. The anxiety builds up, like a heavy weight pressing on your chest. You start wondering, what if I fail in their eyes? It's a cycle, isn't it? The more you focus on their judgment, the heavier it becomes. And the more you try to please, the further you drift from your own peace. It's like standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at the opinions of others below. But here's the truth. You cannot control their judgment. No matter how hard you try, you can't make everyone happy. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus writes, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it." You see, anxiety arises when we allow ourselves to be governed by forces we cannot control. When we live for others, we lose ourselves. We lose sight of what truly matters, our own actions, our values, our peace. The more we try to please everyone, the more disconnected we become from our true selves. Imagine Nick, a man who spent years chasing approval, believing that his worth was tied to the opinions of others. He worked tirelessly, constantly striving to meet expectations, but no matter how much he achieved, he was never truly happy. The accolades were brief, the recognition fleeting, and soon he found himself stuck in a relentless cycle of comparison. Each success felt empty, each failure magnified, and Nick's anxiety spiraled out of control as he continuously compared himself to those around him. Despite his achievements, he was never content. He felt as though he was running a race with no finish line. It wasn't until Nick embraced the Stoic philosophy that his perspective began to shift. The Stoic idea that true happiness comes from within, not from external approval, became his guiding principle. Nick stopped looking outward for validation and started focusing inward, examining his own actions, his integrity, and his choices. He realized that the opinions of others, no matter how loud or persistent, were external and ultimately irrelevant to his peace of mind. What truly mattered was how he chose to live and how he responded to life's challenges. By practicing Stoicism, Nick learned to focus only on what he could control, his own actions and reactions, and let go of the need for external validation. Gradually, this shift allowed him to find peace. He understood that his worth was not determined by how others perceived him, but by how he lived according to his values. Like Nick, we all must learn that our true peace comes not when we live for others, but when we start living authentically for ourselves. 2. The courage to live authentically. In life, we often find ourselves torn between what we believe is right and what others expect from us. This constant tug-of-war can feel exhausting, leaving us questioning our choices, our values, and ultimately, ourselves. We live in a world that constantly urges us to conform, to fit in, to please. There's a subtle pressure, almost invisible, that pushes us toward acting, thinking, and being like everyone else. But here's the thing, this very pressure prevents us from living authentically. To live authentically, we must have the courage to follow our principles, regardless of whether society agrees with us or not. Courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point, said C.S. Lewis. When we stand firm in our values, despite external pressure, we display the true essence of courage. It's important to understand that courage isn't just about grand acts or extraordinary feats. It's about making daily decisions that align with who you truly are. Take Jack, for example. Jack had always dreamed of starting his own business, but he was held back by the fear of failure and the judgment of others. For years, Jack lived in a constant state of indecision, worrying more about what others would think than what he truly wanted. He spent his days imagining the reactions of his friends, family, and colleagues, each of whom had their own ideas of what success looked like. The weight of their expectations was so heavy that it paralyzed him, preventing him from taking any real action toward his goals. It wasn't until one day, when he hit a personal low, that he realized the cost of living for others. He found himself exhausted and disconnected, with his dreams slipping further out of reach. Jack knew that something had to change. He took a long, hard look at his life and recognized that he had been living in fear, not of failure, but of judgment. That was the moment he understood. Living for others was suffocating him, preventing him from living his truth. Jack finally made the decision to act on his dream, regardless of what people might say. That day, he took the first step toward living authentically, with courage guiding him. He realized that true freedom wasn't found in the approval of others, but in the ability to act in line with his own values and principles. Jack's freedom came not from the approval of others, but from the moment he allowed himself to step outside the cage of external judgment and begin living for himself. This is the essence of living for yourself, not for others. The moment we stop seeking approval, we unlock the door to true freedom and authenticity. When we finally embrace our own path, no matter how uncertain it may seem, we open ourselves to the peace and fulfillment that comes from living according to our own terms. We often fear that by living authentically, we'll be rejected, misunderstood, or even criticized. Yet, it's only through this very courage that we find peace with ourselves. So, the next time you feel the pull to please others, to conform, to silence your own voice, remember that courage is not just about bold actions, it's about living true to yourself. True freedom is not in what we do to please others, but in what we choose to do for ourselves, based on our own values. 3. The influence of goals on actions and emotions. Sometimes life feels like a river. We are the boats navigating their currents. The river's flow at first seems to lead us to success, to fulfillment. But as we glide, we realize we're no longer in control. We are following the current that others have set. The river is not ours. It's a path that's been carved by the expectations of others. The river is not ours. It's a path that's been carved by the expectations of others. We're taught from a young age that success is measured by how much we achieve and how much others validate us. Get the approval of others, climb the ladder, and you'll be happy, they say. But Stoicism offers a quiet yet powerful alternative. It suggests that happiness is not a destination achieved by others' validation, but a journey of living by principles we believe in, regardless of how the world reacts. When we set goals based on external expectations, we forget one simple truth. The only thing we can control is our actions. The moment we tie our happiness to someone else's approval, we lose sight of what we truly want. It's as if we're chasing a shadow, always just out of reach. Stoic philosophy tells us that true freedom comes from living according to our own values. It doesn't mean rejecting the world, but rather not letting the world dictate how we should feel about ourselves. When we stop seeking approval, we begin to define success on our own terms. The greatest illusion is thinking that our worth depends on what others think. The Stoics teach us that nothing outside of ourselves can diminish our value. We are free when we no longer need to live up to the expectations of others. Living for yourself means embracing your imperfections. Stoicism doesn't demand perfection, but it does ask for honest self-reflection and the courage to act in alignment with your true values. This kind of living doesn't come from a place of ego. It comes from a place of self-respect and self-awareness. The real question isn't whether others approve of us. The real question is whether we approve of ourselves. When we start living for ourselves, not for others, we unlock a peace that no external validation can give. In the end, living for others can only bring temporary satisfaction. True contentment comes from living authentically, following the path that aligns with your true values. When you live for yourself, not for others, you achieve a peace that no goal or approval can ever give. What are your thoughts on living for yourself, not for others? Have you experienced the peace that comes with aligning your actions with your true values? Let's talk about it in the comments below. 4. Chasing after others' approval leads to unhappiness. Chasing after others' approval leads to unhappiness. We've all been there. You do something, you share it, and you wait. Wait for someone to acknowledge it, to praise it, to validate your efforts. But when you don't get it, something shifts within you. You feel smaller, unworthy, less than. In that moment, you realize that your worth was never truly within your own control. You had just handed it over to someone else. You gave them the power to decide how you should feel about yourself. The problem here is simple. We constantly seek approval, validation, and praise from others because we don't trust our own worth. We place our happiness in the hands of people who may never fully understand us. And in doing so, we bind ourselves to the approval of others, which is always out of our control. Here's the truth. No matter how much we want to be liked or praised, there will always be someone who doesn't. There will always be critics, naysayers, and people who simply don't see things the way we do. It's a natural part of life. If we base our happiness on the approval of others, we are constantly setting ourselves up for disappointment. There's no lasting satisfaction in living for the praise of others. We might receive it for a moment, but it fades. And when it fades, so does our sense of self-worth. The solution lies in self-acceptance. When we stop seeking validation from the outside, we unlock a freedom that is unparalleled. We stop letting others decide our worth. We take full ownership of our actions, our choices, and ultimately, our happiness. This isn't about becoming indifferent to others' opinions. It's about understanding that their opinions do not define us. Their judgments don't make us who we are. Only we have that power. One of the most powerful figures to live by this philosophy was Marcus Aurelius. The Roman emperor, a Stoic philosopher, faced criticism from all sides during his reign. Yet he remained steadfast in his belief that true peace comes from within, not from external validation. The real danger comes when we forget this. When we make our happiness contingent on the opinions of others, we risk losing our own sense of direction. We become like a ship without a rudder, tossed around by the winds of other people's judgments. What we need then is to anchor ourselves in our own values. When we live by our values, we are no longer dependent on others' opinions. We choose our actions, not based on how others will judge us, but on what we believe to be right. Take the example of Steve Jobs. Despite his revolutionary contributions to technology, Jobs faced constant criticism. Yet, he lived by his own rules, ignoring the judgments of others in pursuit of his vision. His life stands as a testament to the freedom and fulfillment that comes with living authentically. The Stoic approach teaches us that our happiness is not something that can be bargained for with others. It's something we find by looking within, by being true to ourselves. And once we start living this way, we will no longer be swayed by the judgments of others. So if you feel lost in the quest for approval, remember this: your worth is not determined by others. You are enough as you are. The moment you stop seeking validation, you begin the journey to true freedom. Live for yourself. Your happiness is your responsibility. 5. Happiness from helping others. Have you ever felt a deep sense of fulfillment after helping someone in need, only to find that the joy fades once you realize you're waiting for some form of recognition? You may have even been caught in a cycle where you do good deeds for the sole purpose of receiving validation. But what happens when the recognition doesn't come, or it's not as grand as you expected? Do you still feel fulfilled? This contradiction lies at the heart of the Stoic philosophy, a philosophy that teaches us to find joy not in the approval of others, but in the simple act of doing good, grounded in a sense of purpose and value. Stoicism invites us to pause and reflect. Where does our happiness truly come from? Is it found in the applause of others, or in knowing that we have lived with integrity, contributing to something greater than ourselves? Let me tell you the story of Daniel, a man I know whose life, like many, was marked by the pursuit of external approval. He worked long hours, sacrificed personal time, and made considerable efforts to please others, especially at work. Daniel sought validation in promotions, accolades, and the recognition of his colleagues. He believed that if people saw him as successful, he would finally feel happy and fulfilled. But there was a catch. The more he chased recognition, the emptier he felt. Even when he earned the praise he sought, it was always fleeting. One day, after another round of empty compliments from his boss, Daniel found himself standing in his office, looking out the window, wondering, is this it? It wasn't the praise that was missing. It was the deeper, internal sense of fulfillment. He realized that, for all the recognition he had received, he had never felt truly content. This is the paradox many of us face. We chase approval and accolades from others, but when we do this, we disconnect from what truly matters. The internal satisfaction of knowing we've done something good simply because it aligns with our values. Stoicism teaches us to reframe this entire way of thinking. Stoic philosophers like Marcus Aurelius often remind us that happiness doesn't come from external circumstances or from others' opinions of us. Happiness, in the Stoic sense, is the result of living in accordance with nature, that is, aligning our actions with our values, regardless of how the world perceives us. When we focus on doing the right thing, not for praise, but because it is inherently good, we find peace. Daniel's turning point came when he began volunteering at a local shelter. He did it not for a thank you, not for a good job or a pat on the back. He simply helped because he believed it was the right thing to do. He gave his time, his skills, and his heart, not because he wanted something in return, but because it felt like the right expression of who he wanted to be. At first, Daniel felt awkward. He wasn't used to doing something meaningful without looking for feedback or approval. But soon, something changed. With every person he helped, he felt lighter, more grounded, and more at peace. It was as though the more he gave, the more he received, but not in the way he had expected. It wasn't external recognition that filled him. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had contributed to the well-being of others. Here's the crux of it. Happiness comes not from what we get, but from what we give. When we act in alignment with our values, when we help others from a place of authenticity, we experience a kind of peace that cannot be disrupted by the external world. This peace is unshakable because it is not dependent on others' approval or success. The Stoics believed in focusing on what we can control, and the only thing we can truly control is our own actions. We cannot control how others will respond to our help. They may thank us, or they may not. They may even criticize us, but none of this should disturb our sense of self or our inner peace. What matters is that we did the right thing because it was the right thing to do. Daniel discovered that the more he helped others without expecting anything in return, the more he felt grounded in his own sense of self-worth. His happiness became less about external recognition and more about his own commitment to living a life of purpose. He found that the act of helping, the very act of contributing to the greater good, became a source of contentment that no amount of praise could provide. So, how can we apply this Stoic principle to our own lives? The first step is to shift our focus from seeking approval to focusing on contributing in a meaningful way. We may help a friend, offer our time to a cause we care about, or simply be kind to those around us. We should strive to give without expecting anything in return. By doing so, we can free ourselves from the pressure of needing others to recognize our actions. We can begin to live for ourselves rather than for others' approval. The key to happiness, as the Stoics teach, lies in this internal shift. When we are content with who we are and the value we contribute, we no longer need external validation to feel good about ourselves. Our actions will speak louder than any words of praise. And in this sense, true happiness, a deep, lasting happiness, is born. Happiness, as Daniel learned, is a quiet thing. It isn't loud, and it doesn't come from applause. It comes from within, from knowing that you've done the right thing, regardless of whether anyone notices. When we stop living for the approval of others and instead live according to our own values, we find a peace that is unshaken by the shifting tides of external circumstances. In the end, happiness is not about grand gestures or public recognition. It's about living authentically, acting with integrity, and finding joy in the simple fact that we've helped someone not because we were seeking something in return, but because it was the right thing to do. 6. Accepting one's own imperfections. There is a story about a ceramic artist named Maria. She spent her entire life crafting beautiful pots, but every time she finished one, she noticed a small crack in the corner. Each time, Maria couldn't help but feel disappointed. She thought she wasn't good enough, not refined enough, and that her creations weren't worthy of her or her customers' expectations. One afternoon, as Maria sat alone in her pottery studio, she gazed at the pots she had just completed. A light breeze blew through the open window, carrying the scent of clay and smoke from the kiln. She felt the quietness around her, but inside there was a constant inner conflict. She quietly asked herself, "If I can't create something perfect, am I worthy of what I've made?" This question isn't just Maria's. It's something we all ask ourselves. Can we truly face our imperfections and limitations, or do we constantly chase an ideal of perfection that society and we ourselves impose? To live for ourselves, we must begin with accepting that we are not perfect. Happiness doesn't come from pleasing others or achieving perfection. It comes from accepting our shortcomings and limitations. Perhaps Maria spent too much time agonizing over the imperfections in her pots. But if she continued down this path, would she ever be able to create something truly meaningful or valuable? The important thing isn't whether her creations are perfect or not. It's whether she can stand firm and accept that those cracks contribute to the uniqueness of each piece. Similarly, each of us has flaws and limits, but the key is accepting ourselves rather than relentlessly chasing an unattainable ideal. Stoicism teaches us that perfection is not the ultimate goal. True freedom, happiness, and inner peace come from accepting our imperfections. When we recognize that we have limitations and flaws, we no longer feel the pressure to meet the standards of perfection that society or anyone else sets. This doesn't mean we give up on improving ourselves, but rather that we accept that everything has its limits and we can't always control the outcome. The feeling of failure when facing imperfection is a natural part of life. However, when we look at it from a different perspective, we realize that each flaw can become an opportunity for growth. Just like Maria's pots, the cracks can be the very details that make them special. When we accept ourselves, we not only learn to love ourselves, but also learn to see imperfection in a positive light. One of the biggest mistakes many people make is constantly seeking approval from others. We think happiness comes from being recognized, from pleasing those around us. But in reality, when we live just for others, we lose ourselves. Maria was once like this. She spent too much time trying to create products she thought others would appreciate, rather than making the pieces that truly resonated with her. Stoicism helps us realize that living an authentic life and taking responsibility for ourselves is the only path to inner peace. When we let go of the desire for perfection and instead learn to accept and love ourselves, we can live freely, no longer bound by invisible expectations from the outside. One day, after sitting alone and reflecting, Maria decided to no longer focus on creating perfect pots. She started to focus on the creative process and how she could express herself through each piece, no longer fearing the cracks. Instead, she began to embrace the imperfection of the pots because it made them unique and valuable. Maria no longer felt the pressure to please everyone. She found joy in the creative process and in the freedom she experienced when accepting her flaws. The change in how she viewed herself made her work more meaningful than ever before. She realized that accepting imperfection was the first step toward living a full and free life. In the end, the issue is not whether we are perfect. It is whether we have the courage to accept ourselves, flaws and all. Perfection is not something we should chase. Accepting and loving ourselves as we are is the key to peace and happiness. Tomorrow, when you look at yourself in the mirror, remember that there's nothing wrong with being imperfect. The cracks are part of you, and it's those very cracks that make you special. Say to yourself, I accept myself with all my limits and imperfections. I don't need to please anyone but myself. Today, take a few minutes to look at your flaws without judgment, simply accepting them. Let them be part of your life story, rather than obstacles that hold you back. And finally, remember that life isn't a race to achieve perfection. It's a journey to become the person you truly are. 7. Happiness comes from the present moment. I know you're caught up in the rush of what's to come, worrying about what's going to happen. Have you ever thought that happiness only comes when you achieve something, when you have enough money, when you hit your career goals, or when you gain recognition from others? If you've thought like this, you're not alone. We all live in a world where happiness seems always just out of reach, something that comes only when we accomplish something big. But here's a simple truth we sometimes forget. Happiness isn't a destination. It's the ability to enjoy the present moment. You might think, I'm worried about the future. I have a list of goals I need to achieve. How can I just sit here and enjoy the present? The answer is simple. Happiness doesn't come from the final result. It comes from the way we live each moment of our lives. Have you ever noticed how we often spend so much time worrying about what's going to happen that we forget to enjoy the very moment we're living in right now? Let's go back to what we discussed earlier, accepting our own imperfections. That's the first step in finding real happiness. When we stop demanding too much from ourselves and from what's happening around us, we begin to relax and experience each moment as a gift. We realize that nothing is perfect, and that's what makes life beautiful. Only then can we truly live authentically without getting swept away by unrealistic expectations. Happiness comes from the present, but it's not something that happens automatically. It requires us to pay attention to the small moments, the simple things we often overlook in the chase for bigger, more glamorous goals. The truth is, you don't need a perfect job, a perfect family, or a grand reputation to feel happiness. True happiness comes from realizing that every step, every breath, every passing minute is valuable, and we can find peace in that. Take Frank, for example, a man I know. He's someone who's been through a lot in life, from failures in his career to broken relationships. One day, Frank shared with me how he used to believe that happiness could only come when he achieved something monumental, something big. He didn't stop to rest, always grinding away, thinking happiness would come once he reached a particular goal. But one day, after he had completed a major project and received recognition from the company, he didn't feel the joy he expected. Instead, he felt empty. No sense of celebration, no satisfaction, just exhaustion. He realized that no matter what he achieved, the feeling of not enough always lingered. Then one morning, while walking through the park, seeing children play, he started to understand something crucial. He realized that the simplest moments, the little things in life, were where true happiness resided. He didn't need to achieve anything grand, nor did he need others' recognition to feel fulfilled. Happiness came from living fully with what he had in the present moment, not something far in the future. When you begin to live in the present moment, you also begin to accept that not everything has to be perfect. Like an old tree, though its branches may not always be lush, its strength in each season of change is what makes it beautiful. You don't need to find a perfect version of yourself to be happy, nor do you need to live by the standards set by society to gain approval. Happiness comes from living authentically in each moment of life. One of the biggest mistakes people make is thinking that happiness is something to be achieved, something to be won. We're so used to setting goals that are far out of reach, thinking happiness will only come when we achieve something significant. But when you live with this mindset, you're always in a state of lacking because nothing will ever be enough. That's why when you achieve a goal, you still feel empty. Happiness isn't in the destination, it's in how you live, in every step you take. So why not try stopping for a moment and looking around? Just take a few seconds to notice the sky, to appreciate the sunlight, or simply to have a real conversation with someone you care about. These moments are where happiness truly lies. Remember, happiness isn't something you need to achieve. It's the ability to live fully with what you have. That's how you find peace within yourself. So today, if you feel anxious or stressed, take a moment to stop and breathe. Look at what's happening around you. Don't rush ahead to the future or dwell on the past. As a reminder, live fully in this very moment. Happiness doesn't come from big accomplishments, but from the ability to notice and cherish the present. In the end, remember that happiness doesn't come from the approval of others. It comes from living authentically, accepting what cannot be controlled, and finding value in the small but meaningful actions of life. True freedom comes only when we let go of the need for external validation and start living according to the principles and values we truly believe in. By embracing the present moment and living on our own terms, we can achieve lasting peace and inner happiness. So, take a moment to reflect. How often do you let the pursuit of others' approval overshadow your own happiness? What small steps can you take today to begin living more authentically and appreciating the present moment? If this resonates with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for more Stoic insights in the upcoming videos, and join us as we continue this journey together. Don't miss out. Your path to a more meaningful, peaceful life is just one click away. Keep following the journey of Stoic philosophy and let it guide you towards a life of purpose and contentment.